Parents, what's the funniest reason you've been called to pick your child up from school? I wasn't the parent. I was the child. It was the 1980s and I was in first grade. We had a couple of recess breaks during the day and, to my first grade mind that hated school, recess was the best part of the day. On this day, however, I really had to go to the bathroom badly when recess was announced, so to my little boy brain I had to make a decision. Recess or bathroom, which quickly became recess because the bathroom was boring. So I went out and played on the playground, and at some point I decided that I wanted to use the slide. So I got in line to go up the slide, but the girl in front of me didn't like me very much. She was always mean to me in the classroom and called me names during recess and was generally a bratty little shit. So she gets to the top of the slide and refuses to go down to keep me from having fun. At this point, I reached a critical juncture of the recess versus bathroom debate. My bladder was near to bursting, recess was almost over and I wasn't going to get to go down the slide before they blew the whistle. So I told the little girl, "You either go down the slide, or I'm gonna pee on you." She didn't go down the slide. My parents were a mixture of dismayed and hysterical when they came to pick me up from school that day. I didn't even get punished. They told me never to do that again between outbursts of laughter on the way home. As a doctor or a nurse, what's the thing that most disturbed you about a patient? A man came into a cardiac care unit after he was found unconscious in the street a few days after Christmas. He was obviously homeless and had not received any medical or dental care for years. We cleaned him up, hooked him to a heart monitor and medicated him. As we continued to work on him, several things disturbed us. Patient X had several scars that could only be from bullets and other injuries from violence. We assumed street fights. His toes were just a tinge short of frostbite, but his ears had not been as lucky. He had also had his tongue crudely removed at some point. Over several days, with an amazing doctor that took Patient X under his wing, we learned he was a veteran that had been wounded in Vietnam. He had 2 Purple Hearts. The knife wound on his side was actually a bayonet that sliced long, but not deep. The bullet wounds were injuries of war, not the streets. Patient X was thoughtful, kind and grateful for anything we did for him. Given the opportunity, he showered twice a day and hoarded food in his bed. We couldn't convince him we would make sure he was fed every day, nor could we get him to share the story of how he lost his tongue. It was not a war injury, but he refused to tell us more. Our amazing doctor arranged for him to go to long-term care at the nearest VA hospital after discharge. Bought him clothes to wear on the trip and made Patient X cry by buying him a watch and new pair of shoes. We were all disturbed to find a veteran in such sad shape, seemingly abandoned by society. He had done his part and made huge sacrifices, but we let him down until it was almost too late. Have you ever met someone who sent you immediate red flags? On my first day working at Domino's Pizza, I was introduced to all the workers. One of the delivery drivers was a guy in his 70s whom we'll call Morgan. He looked at me and said, "I'd ask you out, but I guess you don't date people your grandfather's age." Keep in mind that I was 17 at this point. This was my first real job. Since I had been homeschooled, I wasn't well versed in social norms, but this statement gave me the creeps. When I went home that evening, I discussed it with my mom, who said he was most likely teasing. Morgan kept chatting with me, and I came to know him as a very friendly person. However, a couple of months later, I worked there from halfway through summer break until Thanksgiving. When I got a better job, I was eating a piece of leftover pizza and he grabbed my shoulders. Trying to take a bite out of my pizza, I warned him not to do it again, or I'd elbow him. He talked for weeks about how MJ has pointy elbows, so nobody get on her bad side. I was never comfortable around him from that time on. He kept making comments that made me less comfortable. One day, he said, "You're going to make a wonderful wife and mother someday." Finally, I brought it up with my parents again. When I mentioned that he'd given me his business card so I could use him as a professional reference, they realized what was going on. My dad called the manager, who was the best guy ever with 6 kids of his own, and decided to let my dad, a tough as nails, Glock-carrying Italian gym rat in cowboy boots, do whatever he thought was best. I gave my dad Morgan's schedule, and the two of them had a nice chat out in the parking lot. Morgan said about 5 words to me the entire rest of the time I worked there. It was glorious.
Cashiers, what products make you silently judge someone? Working in a liquor store has its sad moments, but you also start to really care for some of your regulars, even though they're alcoholics. Alcohol is a depressant, so it follows naturally that you're going to run into some sad stories. I once has a very nice, well-dressed, mid-50s woman come into my store, and although she wasn't out of place physically, we're a nicer, higher-end liquor store. She was there at like 1 a.m. and didn't seem to know her way around the beer cooler. I asked if I could help her find something and she pretty silently says Blue Moon. I do my thing and show here where it is, suggest some similar beers, ask her if there's anything else I can help her find, and she says no. While I'm ringing her up, she's very focused on getting a receipt. We don't automatically print them, so I usually just chat with customers to fill the 5 seconds it takes me to pull up the menu and find a receipt and print it. She asks me to make her a few copies just in case and I'm like, of course, not a problem, and then she asks if I have an envelope or something to keep them safe. I try my best to find something for her and end up folding some cardboard and rubber banding it for her, and I ask her why she's going through all the trouble to keep her receipts safe. She breaks down and tells me that she's on her way to the hospital where her daughter is dying. All she wanted before she went was to share a blue moon with her mother. She was bawling and could barely hold herself upright by this time, so I went around the counter and gave her a big hug until she could pull herself together. One of those hugs where the person you're hugging is just shaking from grief and squeezing you as tight as they can for support. I helped her to her car and told her to be safe on her drive. I could tell that she was a Christian from her Jesus fish and cross hanging from her rear view, and although I don't believe in any of that anymore, I just told her I'll pray for you and your family, which made her cry a bit and she hugged me one more time, then she left. I never saw her again, but if God ends up being real, he got his first prayer for me in 2 years, and I hope he takes care of her.
What are some of the most mind-blowing celebrity facts? Jackie Chan, having spent 12 months in the womb, had to be surgically removed and weighed 12 pounds at birth. Sylvester Stallone was so poor he had to sell his dog for $25 a week. Later, he sold the script for Rocky and brought him back for $15,000. When Muhammad Ali won his first Olympic medal, he said that to his high school teacher who once taunted him, "You may never going to be nothing." In 2004, actor Paul Walker secretly purchased a $10,000 engagement ring for a U.S. military veteran. Paul was at a jewelry store and overheard a couple talking about a ring they love, but that was too expensive. Paul quietly put the ring on his tab and walked out of the door. When Cristiano Ronaldo was asked to donate his shoes to a 10-month-old kid who had a brain disorder, he instead additionally gave $83,000 to fully pay for the surgery. Bruce Lee was so fast that they actually had to slow the film down so you could see his moves. Eminem's song Lose Yourself was the first rap song to win an Oscar for Best Original Song. But Eminem didn't even watch the awards because he didn't think he stood a chance at winning. Instead, he fell asleep watching cartoons with his daughter.
What is the rudest thing that a new neighbor has done to you immediately after you had moved in? I had a bad neighbor once. Shortly after I moved in, he started calling the police about any little thing. My trash can went out too early, police showed up. Had a few friends over for a housewarming who parked on the street, enforcement was called to ticket them minutes after alternating parking times switched. After several such petty things happened, I assumed the local cops were just bored and or being jackholes. Then there was a noise complaint that a cop showed up for, and noted the volume was fine, had a radio on while working on my car. He kind of let slip who called it in by going to speak with the neighbor, across the road. After that I spoke to him one day, first time beyond waving and saying hi. When I saw him out on his porch, he basically called me a slur, and told me to go procreate with myself. After that I went out of my way to keep as clean a nose as possible, but started retaliating in kind. I called in his high grass when he let it get too long, called enforcement to ticket his daughter's car a changeover, called the police to report a drunk driver after he'd been drinking on his porch and loudly asked his daughter if she wanted anything from the local burger joint as he got in the car. He did some work on his house, and I called the city inspector. He got fines for lack of permits on that one. The turning point came when he was watching his granddaughter. Whoever would leave a 4-year-old with that man is an idiot. He was again drinking, and passed out with her playing by the road. I called it in. Cops arrived to find her in the road drawing with chalk, and him passed out drunk on the porch. He took a swing at the cops that woke him, which landed him in jail overnight. The daughter and granddaughter stopped coming over as often after that. He got pissed when he found out I'd called it in, and screamed at me from his porch one night, threatening me. When I told him to procreate with himself, he threw a bottle, and damaged my property, all caught on camera. He started across the road, but changed his mind when the dog stood up and bristled. I called it in and insisted I wanted to press charges when they showed up. They approached him, and he got rowdy, probably drunk again, and was arrested, again. Second trip to jail in 1 week. A week or so later, he called the 911 and filed a report that I had unlicensed dogs running amok, snapping at kids. I provided papers for my well-trained and very friendly dogs, all licensed and vaccinated, then showed time-stamped video footage of the dogs laying in the sun in my fenced backyard that day. The front cameras showed no dogs or kids anywhere for hours before, just the officers walking up to the house. After I noted his recent arrests for public drunkenness, the officer decided to do a sobriety test. More arguments, resisting, back in handcuffs, and off to jail. They charged him with filing a false report and resisting arrest that time. The judge gave him a small fine, and warned they'd allow my motion for a restraining order if he wound up in court again within 6 months. He didn't last 4 weeks. One night he got drunk, and got the bright idea to take out the cameras before smashing up my car, as if they weren't night vision enabled, and footage would be lost if he smashed them first. I had video of him swinging at them in the car. He couldn't see, or reach, the camera on the second story, which recorded all of it. Videos weren't really needed though, since the cops showed up while he was still in my driveway. They chased him a block or two, more resisting, another trip to jail, and he was held for trial this time. That one cost him thousands in damages and the restraining order. Somehow he didn't lose his job, but that didn't stop him from lying about it and refusing to pay. I eventually got a lien on his house and his income garnished for non-payment. My lawyer was a true saint through all of this. Months later he came crying to me to call off the lawyers, because he couldn't make ends meet and was going to lose his home. I told him if he didn't get off my property I'd call the cops on him for violating the restraining order. It took him a few seconds, but he was sober, and decided not to push it, and really, no sense sending him back to jail. I'd never get my money that way. Eventually he put the house up for sale, and both my lawyer and I finally got paid off when it closed. I found out later he hadn't just been targeting me. He'd been doing the same petty things to several other neighbors for years, but nobody had stood up to him. All were happy to see him leave. I pity his new neighbors, wherever he wound up, but I feel not 1 ounce of remorse for putting the screws to him. He earned every twist he took, and then some.